Hi, welcome to the channel, and welcome to another instalment of our Masterclass series. This is a series of videos where I am joined by a high level Pokemon player or players to discuss a Pokemon archetype or element of gameplay they're particularly proficient at or with. These videos should hopefully serve as an educational resource for the VGC community as a whole for older and newer players alike. This week we're joined by Taran Birdee, one of the strongest players in the world, to talk about Arubega Miraidon, one of the strongest teams to ever be built. This composition came first place at the World Championships, came first place at the following Birmingham Regional Championships, and is scattered all across Top Cut wherever you look. Taran is an expert of the archetype and has been using it at the World Championships himself and also EUIC and into Vancouver regionals as well. Taran is one of the strongest players in Europe with multiple cuts, a top 4 at EUIC and a cut at 2024 Worlds, and is definitely qualified to talk about the composition that allowed him to get some of these great results. Let's get into the conversation.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Taran. I've been playing for 6, 7 years now, roughly. This is my fifth season competing. I've from the UK. I've had quite a few, you know, decent results. And I guess I'm here talking today about Arubega Miraidon because actually during Reg G, it's been the team I've used the most, and I've had a number of top cuts, notably top four at the last EUIC, a couple of top 16s at regionals, and yeah, it's a team I love, and a team that's incredibly strong too.
So Miraidon sort of didn't do great in early grassroots tours. Wasn't considered one of the main threats, and then came out and immediately won Indianapolis, in which we can see some of the pieces that would end up on sort of the Arabega team. What are your thoughts on this? Sort of breakout Miraidon team.
Um, yeah, I think one of the things that was particularly impressive about the team was the way it made the use of Miraidon and really brought out all of its strengths, using like Tailwind, Fake Out and Intimidate, Priority Blocking, and Redirection. You have it all on the team, and um, yeah, Miraidon's one of Miraidon's biggest strengths that I don't think people realize was the ability to have super strong volt switches. So being able to lead with it and get out quickly while doing huge damage into some of your more defensive pieces. And as you say, it kind of looks like an Arubega Miraidon structure already. One of the important things being that Whimsicott, Miraidon, and kind of Farigiraf, with the defensive fake out pivot, which in this case is Incineroar, but has since become an Iron Hand. That kind of core seems to have been figured out quite early and just iterated upon.
Miraidon continued to do well. Matt Maynard, one of our own, another UK player, then went and got top 4 at Stockholm. And you see you see Iron Hands on the team for the first time, and then you also see an Ogerpon on the team for the first time, albeit a different Ogerpon being Wellspring. Um, so you can sort of start to see
Yeah.
how it starts to build up.
Yeah, the Iron Hands here, I think it was something that people hadn't quite, picked up on until Stockholm, where actually Matt Maynard and one of the Hoed brothers also used Iron Hands on a Miraidon team. And I think, it goes without saying, Iron Hands is one of probably the best Pokemon ever made. And the only thing holding it back has been that it's not had a good ability. And so when you give it an ability and are able to draw out some more of those strengths, having a good trick room mode and things like that, it it fits perfectly on Miraidon teams, even though they share ground weaknesses. At times, it barely feels like Iron Hands has a weakness, and yeah, it fits so perfectly on the team. And there's a reason why Iron Hands is a fixture on every Miraidon team these days.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. So then, continued to do well, and then Luca came So the eventual world champion was on it early. This was a dark Urshifu, so you start to see Urshifu pop up on the comp, so you can sort of see the development again. But we are still Terra Electric at this point. Terra Fairy is still yet to come. But yeah, obviously I think Urshifu starting to appear on the comp is pretty significant for its development.
Yeah, these teams kind of get rid of the Ursaluna, which kind of fit on the Trick Room style of the team, but otherwise you really had to invest in its stats in an awkward way to make it work with the Tailwind as well. I think this team takes a more hyper offensive approach, even more so a hyper offensive approach than previous teams with Ogerpons on had. And I think the biggest, point to note on this kind of team is the light screen Whimsicott and just how even such a small change on Whimsicott actually com gives a whole new dimension to how the team can play into certain matchups. And the light screen Whimsicott is another of these things that has not changed at all since it's been introduced on Whimsicott as a move.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, like it's like you just look at that Whimsicott set and like it's that's not changed, and you won't see that change. You see very recently the items just changed again, but like the four moves were very set on Whimsicott, and then the original Arubega build drops. This is a Liberty Note link, but you can see this is the six that will eventually go on to win worlds, and a lot of the terrors and stuff saying the Terra Fairy Miraidons has started to happen, which is now agreed on as the way to go, and that's not really changed either. No one's really ever gone back to Terra Electric, to my knowledge. And then
Yeah, I think around this time, a lot of people were testing out Terra Fairy on these Miraidons, um, mainly for the defensive utility of it, and also the ability in the mirrors to have a if you're Terra Electric, both Miraidons can just throw out Draco Meters at each other, and whoever moves first wins. Terra Fairy makes those, at least forces a mind game, while giving you a far more consistent spread move that doesn't require you to either hit your opponent or force it, or like require you to Terra into a ground type. Um, so that's kind of become the standard set nowadays. I think otherwise you kind of see a lot of the stuff that we were seeing on Luca's team. The other key difference being the choice of fire type here. And around this time, people were testing out loads of different fire types. So as Entei was being seen, Chiyu as we've seen already. Ogerpon seems to have been the one that's really stuck though.
yeah,
And I think just the utility it can provide and its typing as well.
so then Luca goes on to win worlds, and the difference from the Arabega team that we just looked at is the type of Urshifu, a water Urshifu as opposed to a dark Urshifu. But other than that, the team is very similar. The Terra types changed on the hands and the Whimsicott. But yeah, this is a world championship winning team. What is it that made this? Obviously, everyone was aware of it. Like it was everywhere going into worlds. Like you could not be aware of it. I was helping friends prepare for worlds. This was like this team had a massive target on its back. Yet it still did incredibly well. So what made it just sort of, sort of allowed it to still succeed in spite of it having a massive target on its back.
I think, this was also a team I used at the World Championships, albeit I was still using the Dark Urshifu rather than the Water Urshifu. And I think what I kind of drew me to the team eventually was that it feels like it can play in different speeds and also in most different matchups. That you've got a lot of just rock solid Pokemon. You're not making any concessions anywhere on the Pokemon you're using. Um, they're all incredible. And just the level of support and the control you can put over games with so much speed, with the fake out, with the bulk on certain Pokemon. is why I think this team was extremely hard to beat. And this really feels like the last time the team could get away with, you know, winning an event and not, while it was on people's radars, it wasn't the most popular team going into the event. And this is really the last time that it wasn't the biggest meta threat. And Luca made perfect, use of that. And the Water Urshifu kind of changes some matchups and flips the matchups in different favors. I think the important thing as well to note on this team is low kick iron hands. This was something that people had been testing out before the event. I know Arubega was using it himself. I also ended up using it at the event, and so did Neon, the other player who was in top four using this style of team. Um, just basically, it's a super strong move in a restricted format where everything is so heavy. Pokemon like Miraidon can be hit for 120 base power. Um, Zacians, Koraidons, Calyrex Ice Riders, opposing Iron Hands, um, even Urshifu it's 100 base power move on. So it was just that was also one of the moves that I think, while it didn't change the way the team played, just made Iron Hands so much almost a second restricted with its level of power at that point.
for sure.
Um, so there were just a lot of like little things that I think were slight adjustments, but just optimized the team even further to a point where it could win the world championships.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time my Miraidon got hit by a low kick. I was like, oh, it does that much. Like
Yeah,
it's
it
yeah,
is unbelievably powerful.
yeah. Like that's just like the optimizations that are made going into like the worlds. Like you said, you ran it as well, and like yeah, you had an incredibly you cut worlds as well. So that's not that you had a bad run, but
Mhm.
obviously yeah.
Yeah,
What it turned out that Water Urshifu was the adaptation. And then yeah, so we then move on to post worlds, and we obviously have a break from Reg G, go to Reg H. Then we come back, and it's still really good. It wins Birmingham with some minor
yeah,
changes. Terra Poison Iron Hands, for example, um, and then you take it to top four of the EUIC. So you can talk about this version of it. Obviously, yeah, it's like interesting to see how the comp has developed post worlds into a new meta game. And obviously you can still see a lot of similarities to the world team, but yeah, there are some changes. For example, you weren't running Urshifu water at the worlds, but it's no longer a Sash Urshifu. It's now actually a Mystic Water.
yeah. So I think for post worlds, even Birmingham as well, Arubega Miraidon was clearly the team to beat. It's just won the world championships. It was an incredible team, and you either used it or you beat it. And if you didn't do either of those, you probably weren't winning the event. Um, so I was one of those that decided to use it. I felt like it kind of matched how I liked to play as best as possible. Birmingham went quite well, and I kind of tried a load of other stuff, but Miraidon was always the team that I would come back to. When I was getting frustrated, I'd just win a few games with Miraidon and be using it again.
Yeah,
Um, I think one of the things that Miraidon teams can struggle with sometimes is like GM powers or sash Pokemon that are a bit hard to get rid of quickly. Um, like Rapid Strike Urshifu really helps with that. And in particular, going with Mystic Water in a bit more bulk seems to be the way that a lot of people went. One other thing that completely changed for the event that I didn't quite get the memo of, but everyone else seemed to be using was really bulky Miraidons, and with almost max HP in some cases. Being that bulky on, legendary Pokemon with such amazing stats like Miraidons means you can live attacks that you wouldn't expect normally, and that can really flip a load of matchups in terms of, against opposing Landorus, for example. You might be able to live their Earth power just out of nowhere. But it does also change quite drastically certain matchups like Zamazenta. And against opposing rock Ogerpons where you can be slower than them. And so it's really just a matter of, which way you decide to go with it. And I didn't personally feel comfortable going that slow, but I think it's a big reason why Zine and Co and Luca to an extent were able to do so well at EUIC as well. That bulk I imagine really threw a lot of people off.
Sure. Do you think now the cat's out of the bag, people are gonna have to start getting quicker again, or do you think?
Well, I think now that they have shown that bulk can work, I think it's just going to be a bit of a toss-up as to when you see a Arubega Miraidon, you have no idea how bulky they could be. Um, but at least it will be in people's minds. And I have never felt like the speed interactions were the be all and end all of the matchup. You can definitely help being faster, but also in some si- situations being slower can be a good thing. Getting a slow volt switch out, for example, setting up Trick Room. And so I could see bulky becoming the standard now, as long as you are able to play the Zamazenta matchup in particular in certain ways, um, and have a like really rock solid game plan. I think going bulky might become the standard as we go forwards.
But yeah, interesting. Yeah, and then yeah, so that's sort of like the more recent adaptations that we've been looking at. Um, yeah, so we will talk a bit more about the history when we get to the end, but now we're actually going to talk about the pieces of the team itself. So why don't we get into obviously the star piece, Miraidon? Um, obviously, it's your restricted. Like, yeah, obviously you spoke earlier a little bit about the discovery of why it's so good. Super strong volt switches, just
Yeah.
insane damage. But yeah, what makes this the centerpiece? What makes this the restricted
So
choice for so many people?
I think Miraidon is probably the damage ceiling of the format in terms of it does such unbelievable damage on a single target that I mean the type chart barely matters in some cases. Um, and while that's a good thing, one of its other key strengths is being a great pivot too, being a fast and strong pivot. Usually, when you see moves that switch a Pokemon out, like U-turn or Volt Switch or Parting Shot, they do a little bit of damage, and the real benefit is switching out. With Miraidon, what you find is actually it has the best of both worlds. It switches you out with a huge chunk of damage on top of that. And that's what I think has turned it into a real titan in like the format. Also, Fairy being a great defensive typing as well as having offensive benefit just means that really the choice spec set is the way to go. It is just so strong, it's so fast, and that's I think what draws a lot of people to it.
Yeah, I think
As touched on like previously, um, there's a couple of ways to run it, like in terms of spreads, but that's really all you're going to see a difference in. You're either super bulky or a bit faster with a little bit of bulk. Um, but one thing to note is that almost all Miraidons on this composition are modest because they've got the support of the Tailwind
yeah,
and also the Trick Room.
absolutely. Yeah, I do think it's incredible, and like you say, it's quite versatile in how you play it. Because like you don't have to lead it. Obviously, you probably lead it more often than not. But then you've also got what you can do. You can just Terra
Mm,
Fairy Gleam. You can just get out of there. Like, yeah, I do think
yeah,
it's always very scary on lead. Now I've stopped
it's
playing it.
one of
I'm
the
like,
most versatile Pokemon as
don't want
well.
to play it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've come off it, and now I'm like, well, I don't really like facing it. So, um,
exactly. Nothing feels quite as powerful as Miraidon does once you've used Miraidon. And I think, as you say, you don't have to lead it as well. It's one of the most versatile restrictors in that you can lead it and get insane value. Where a lot of other restrictors need to come in from the back to into a good position, Miraidon is most of the time in a good position, and if it's not, it has a fast volt switch to get out of there quickly.
yeah.
So it never really feels like it's in a terrible spot.
Absolutely. So why don't we talk about Whimsicott, which was, yeah, it's pretty much been there since day one as well on Miraidon teams. So why is it the perfect
Yeah.
prankstermon that goes with it? Why not Tornadus? I suppose yeah,
So I think Whimsicott's value comes from its typing. Being a fairy type gives some nice defensive utility alongside Miraidon, being able to switch into dragon moves and things like that. But also just its supportive toolkit, whereas Tornadus is a little bit more of an offensive prankster tailwind setter. With Whimsicott, you're really just trying to leverage Miraidon and Miraidon's strengths. Um, so obviously tailwind, but really the two key moves we've seen are Encore and Light Screen being used as the fourth moves, and there's been very little variation in that. And I think that's because going back to Miraidon's defensive stats, actually it's got incredible bulk, and so when bolstered by a Light Screen, suddenly you get a Pokemon that's and Encore is just amazing disruption. One of the things about a choice specs Pokemon like Miraidon is it can get faked out quite easily. Encore punishes that very easily. Um, and also just being able to lock Pokemon into certain moves can make Miraidon and the rest of the team have a lot of an easier time. Um, at EUIC, in fact, I used Encore to lock a Terrapagos into Calm Mind and Protect for a few turns, and also actually won my top 16 match because I Encored a Calyrex into Trick Room. And so even though it was able to reverse the speed, it couldn't do anything because Encore had that kind of lock that Tornadus might not have given. Um, I think Terra type wise, there have been a few different ones throughout the times. Terra Water was kind of an early choice because it was able to resist Chien-Pao's Icicle Crash and Surging Strikes, and it's just quite good in general. But Dark has kind of become the standard on these Covert Cloak sets, mainly for one specific. Well, it can't be taunted when you Terra, which is one useful point, but also it's really valuable in these Wheezing Calyrex Shadow matchups, where you can resist an Astral Barrage or be immune to an Expanding Force, which allows you to get the Tailwind up and really put some pressure on an otherwise tricky matchup.
yeah,
Um, on Zine and Ko's EUIC team, they were Focus Sash, so they could afford to run Terra Ghost instead. I think that's the main variation we see in the item is
yeah.
Covert Cloak or Focus Sash. Um, Focus Sash has a lot of value in a lot of matchups. The mirror, it can help by being able to survive an attack. Um, these Weezing Kali Shadow matchups where you don't have to Terra to be able to get your Tailwind up. But it can struggle sometimes in these Rillaboom, Incineroar setup, like fake out cycle teams where actually they can cycle their fake outs and you are not able to encore their nasty plots or calm minds as easily.
Yeah.
Um, we also see that a lot of these Whimsicots go very specially defensive. Um, I'm talking like max HP, almost max special defense, sometimes even a calm nature. And that is mainly because once you set up a light screen, you have a much better time versus Calyrex Shadow.
Yep.
Um, you can actually be so bulky that you can live two lifeful barrages once you set up light screen, and that can just give you so much more room to light screen once, then tailwind, and then maybe encore if they try and set up as well. You just get a lot more room to attack.
Yeah.
Um, I personally decided I wanted to be a bit faster than that, and actually the faster Whimsicott in these mirrors is the one that can maybe you trade tailwinds, but then you'd be investing in special defense. But where you draw the line at the speed is up to you largely.
For sure. No, it's a really great piece, and like you say, it's I suppose the biggest considerations are Terra type and item. I think the moveset's pretty locked
Yeah,
up.
yeah. I think some people have considered trying Endeavor on these Focus Sash sets, but the utility of Light Screen or Encore is just far too great.
Absolutely. And then on to Farigiraf, which was another day one, and the Electric Seed was the another day one, um,
Mm,
which is obviously really cool text. Originally for Cali Ice, because obviously you can't have a berry against Cali Ice, and
yeah,
it's stuck, and there's no reason to if it ain't broke. Like,
exactly. I think going back to the idea of being a choice specs restricted, being so vulnerable to fake out can sometimes mean you lose turns under tailwind or just turns of electric terrain. Freegraph just kind of shuts all of that down. It can shut down Thunder Waves from Grimmsnarl as another example. Taunt, just a whole bunch of things. It's a good way to support such an offensive team by allowing you to make use of the turns where you're being aggressive. Helping Hand is also great on it just to give that extra level of power to the whole team. And also, as you say, with Electric Seed, it suddenly becomes the big part of your Calyrex Ice matchup. It can set Trick Room against faster teams, but also reverse Trick Room against Calyrex Ice teams, and also have Foul Play to hit both Calyrex Ice and Calyrex Shadow quite hard. Um, we see most of these teams, or most of these Farigiraphs use, even though they've got the Electric Seed, they still invest heavily in defense to be able to take, as it happens, you can survive 2+1 Glacial Lances from Calyrex Ice if you invest enough. And that can be really key in surviving Trick Room turns,
yeah,
maybe getting some damage off. The other kind of noteworthy change we've seen over time is that originally Friggrass used Psychic Noise as their move of choice. Um, this is important for slowing down Terrapagos teams where they can't get their leftovers in grassy terrain recovery and get back their Terra Shell. But it's kind of fallen out of favor when looked at against Psychic, mainly for the power. Psychic Noise doesn't one-shot Urshifu Rapid Strike, which can be a problem sometimes. And actually, the extra power from Psychic on a Pokemon with a good special attack stat does make a difference.
for sure. Like,
But once again, yeah, the set doesn't really change that much.
absolutely. I suppose the psychic helps against stuff like a Moongus as well. Makes it a lot easier to remove.
Yes, exactly. You can 2-hit KO Among Us now with Psychic, whereas you actually can't sometimes with Psychic Noise,
Yeah,
which
that's
can be
bad.
really painful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's a
Also, the Terra types are typically water
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, I think there's not a lot of deviation on Terra type since originally on the discharge
Yeah,
sets it was ground and now it's sort of yeah.
exactly. Yeah, ground was kind of necessary when you were discharged to give you the ability to, well, discharge next to something, but it's really not good defensively. Water is so much better defensively for taking glacial lances when you need to. And I think some people are testing Terrafire around EUIC time, but just being a bit weak to surging strikes and high horsepower on those kind of Calyrex Ice teams just made it not super valuable. So yeah, water seems to have just been the one that's stuck, and it's very hard to justify any other Terra type on it.
For sure. Now on to Iron Hands, the second restricted of the team. It's
Mm,
it's it's a joke, but it's really stupidly it's stupid. It's so
yeah,
strong. Um, yeah, like
it is, truly an unbelievable Pokemon. And it has been since it was released, but Miraidon teams just seem to take it to another level, and this is why we also see it on a lot of other teams, because it can use Miraidon to get that Quark Drive boost and offer base 140 attack with strong attacks already. Suddenly you get a Pokemon that's hitting really hard and is, quite frankly, unkillable. Um, it's Iron Hands is one of these Pokemon that since we've seen it, the Terra types have shifted quite a lot, but and the moves have shifted a little. So there's quite a variation in sets that you can go for. I think Fake Out and Drain Punch are obviously the two moves you're always going to have. Um, but from that, you could use Wild Charge, which we saw Luke use at the World Championships. Um, it's obviously a super powerful move with electric terrain boosting it as well. Um, but you take recoil, and that can sometimes feel a little bit awkward on a Pokemon that's supposed to have a lot of HP and a lot of bulk. Heavy Slam is something we've seen used a lot more now and seems to be the standard choice or a standard like choice on these teams. Um, its ability to knock out Fluttermane in one shot, hit Clefairy quite hard, as well as these Terra Fairy Calyrexes. And Amoonguss actually is quite nice. And then low kick being the last move, just in a restricted format, it is just so unbelievably strong.
Yeah.
These no bulk Miraidons can get one shot sometimes by low kick, um, which is just it's crazy.
Insane, yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah,
and so I think the standard set we've started to see is Fake Out, Drain Punch, Heavy Slam, low kick.
for sure. Like, yeah, I suppose there's a little bit of room for innovation on the moveset on hands to suit your play style.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does seem like that is
Yeah, I
the
think
most
you can
optimal for
use
the
Wild
majority of
Charge if
players.
you'd like.
Yeah.
I think so. Even Volt Switch is a move that could be used as well. It's quite interesting for being able to Volt Switch with your Miraidon and then Volt Switch with your Iron Hand second to get straight back in to Miraidon. I guess in terms of like Terra types as well, we've seen a whole bunch, and it really depends on what you feel like is current, like popular in the format at the time. So Terra Grass, for example, and Terra Water are both good at resisting Kyogre hits. Terra Grass helps against Amoonguss, while Terra Water helps against Calyrex Ice a bit more. We've seen Terra Bug and Terra Poison as well, which are really great in the mirror for being able to resist opposing low kicks and, in Poison's case, Dazzling Gleams. But Poison can, feel a little lackluster against Earth Power from Landorus, whereas Terra Bug can feel a little bit weak against Fire Ogerpons in the mirror. So all Terra types have like benefits and drawbacks, and none feel like they're like the perfect Terra type for Iron Hands. But what you might see from EUIC is that a lot of Iron Hands ended up going with Terra Water, just as being a generally quite neutral and good Terra type for Iron Hands.
For sure. Yeah. So do you think there's still room for a bit more? Like people, do you think people will just keep testing? It'll be a sort of a matter of
I
preference for a
think
lot of people.
I think so. I think Iron Hands is one of those Pokemon that you can adjust based on the matchups you're likely to face. Um, and something else that's quite interesting is where you decide to put your speed tier on Iron Hands at. Lucas at the World Championships was min speed, brave, zero attack, oh, zero speed IVs, just to underspeed Calyrex Ice all the time. But Zene's and Code's one was actually a bit faster than that, and mine was somewhere in between. I think you can go wherever you want, really, because Iron Hands just has so much in going its way in terms of stats that actually investing more in speed doesn't really hurt you too much.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there was a time when you'd have your hands outspeed your Farigiraf by like one, so you could psychic noise
Yeah,
then fighting move a Terrapagos or something. So like
yeah,
pretty tough.
exactly. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with the Iron Hand speed set, and it ends up being a lot of preference really.
Yeah,
Iron Hands is just, as I say, a ball of stats, and so quite customizable
yeah,
as you see fit.
yeah. I think it's just an overarching point on like yeah. Obviously the Mons don't necessarily change too much on this team, but like it's you can be really flexible with your EVs,
Yeah,
which like yeah allows you to be suit your play style or adapt
I think
better.
that's what we've, I think that's what we've seen recently with this Arubega Miraidon style is that, yeah, while the moves don't really change, and some of the terror types don't really change. It's the creativity in the EV spreads or like slight move adjustments here and there that can change matchups in certain ways and actually make it a lot more difficult to play against.
for sure. Moving on to Ogerpon Fire, which is I'd say probably one of the last pieces to join the original comp. So obviously
Yeah,
now don't really think I can imagine Arubega Miraidon team without it, or even with one of the other Ogerpons. But yeah, it's fairly late to the party, but yeah, really strong. And
I think to me, seeing a Fire Ogerpon on a Miraidon team is what defines Arubega Miraidon to me.
yeah,
It's kind of the choice of fire type that gives you by far the most flexibility in your game plans, in your like diversity of your offense as well. And when I mean, what I mean by diversity of offense is not only in its typing, so having fire and grass typing to kind of complement, the dragon and the water typing you get on the team, but also just being able to follow me, being able to follow me and allow your Miraidon more room to play, allow your Urshifu more room to attack, even go for things like follow me, trick room. Um, these are all things that make Ogerpon really great for the team. And I mean, it's an Ogerpon. It's incredibly strong when it terastallizes. It is. It has the same level of power as restricted Pokemon once it terastallizes,
yeah,
and that's I guess another part of that diversity of the offense in that you can have certain matchups where actually Miraidon is not the key piece of the team, but actually it's maybe the Ogerpon is the one that you're building your offense around. And as an example, in my EUI set in top eight, it ends up being that Miraidon was kind of a passenger in the matchup and in the team. Um, I think something important as well is that the fire typing on any Pokemon actually in that slot is really important in the mirror because if you look at the team without a fire type, it's suddenly incredibly fairy weak. And so opposing Miraidons can just start clicking Dazzling Gleam against you. And Ogerpon really punishes that. And a lot of mirror matchups can come down to A, are you able to get into a position where you can Dazzling Gleam for free? And B, if not, are you able to punish your opponent for locking into Dazzling Gleam by getting your Ogerpon into position to start threatening a lot of damage
yeah,
in return? Um, I think what we see in Ogerpon movesets is, follow me, Ivy Cudgel, Spiky Shield, obviously.
yeah,
And the last move has typically been a grass move from Hornleech or Woodhammer. Um, I think people have trended away from Hornleech, and I personally did as well. I used Hornleech at the World Championships and haven't gone back to it since.
yeah,
Um, you don't really find much time to click the grass move, and when you do, you need the power. But we saw Zine and Co. use Focus Energy at EUIC, and this is like a really interesting option because in those Rillaboom, Incineroar, fake out cycle matchups, you can find your Ogerpon getting intimidated 2 or 3 times, and suddenly it's useless. But Focus Energy just allows you to ignore all of that and keep Ivy cudgeling for a good amount of damage. Um, and it's a really interesting option in those matchups. Something we also see is a trend towards slower and bulkier Ogerpons, um, mainly because actually when you invest in a lot of HP on Ogerpon, behind light screen as well, you can live some crazy attacks. You can EV Ogerpon, and one of the key things in Miraidon mirror matchups is you can EV to set up a light screen and be able to survive an electric terrain Draco Meteor from opposing Miraidon. That's the calc that a lot of Ogerpons go for, and yeah, just being able to be that bulky and survive those hits can really throw off a lot of people's matchups. Whereas, usually they expect it to be a fast offensive threat, and suddenly you're just super slow and super bulky. At EUIC, I was 4 speed EVs in my Ogerpon. I basically dropped all of the speed in favor of bulk and power.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like it's another one that's really customizable. Like I know it's not a Miraidon team. You
Mm,
see the Tang team where they were actually impish Ogerpon, which is
exactly.
man, like you're really physically
Yeah,
bulky. Like yeah, it's got the natural stats to sort of do with whatever you wanted it to do, which is yeah really cool. Makes it really flexible.
yeah. I think having read quite a few other people tested out this impish Ogerpon after seeing it on the Tang team and seeing whether it would work on Miraidon too. Um, I think the issue I found personally was the drop in power was noticeable and did matter.
Yeah,
As an example, if you're impish, or even if you drop attack too low and are still adamant, you can start to not be able to one-shot in DDs with a Terrifier Ivy Cudgel.
yeah,
And that can matter because obviously in DDs reversing your terrain, um, which can be quite annoying. There was a game where I actually got a critical hit on a Calyrex Ice with an Ivy Cudgel and I didn't one-shot it.
yeah,
And stuff like that as well can really cause you some problems. So there is like an attack benchmark level you need to hit,
yeah,
um, which Impish doesn't quite get you to, unfortunately,
yeah,
because I would have been really cool on this team.
yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, it's just like when people are building their Arabega teams, just like yeah, that's something to keep in mind is that you do need your Ogerpon to
Yeah.
pick up some key KOs.
Yes, exactly.
Nice. And move on to Urshifu. Um, Obviously, everyone knows how broken Urshifu is. It's hit through protect. It's
Yes.
one of the
Yeah.
most broken Pokemon of all time. It's been both iterations. I think this is one of the only two slots you identified that could or have been different stuff fairly regularly,
Yeah.
which is just the Urshifu form, and then we'll talk about the other one in a minute. So, obviously, the standard is Water Urshifu, so we'll talk about that one.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think going back to what I was saying about Ogerpon, it's just the diversity of your offense. And on offensive teams, you can never go wrong with an Urshifu, essentially.
yeah,
But that water typing has come to be extremely useful in terms of like Calyrex Ice matchups, Kyogre matchups. It has like defensive utility on top of being an offensive threat. Some other things that are quite nice about it is Aquajet, um, being able to pick off low HP Pokemon or set up Pokemon to be one shot by Miraidon.
yeah,
Um, Examples of this are Rock Ogerpon, where if they're no bulk, sometimes an Aquajet plus a Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam can remove it straight away. And for a Pokemon that relies on its sturdy to get a lot of value, that's extremely good. Um, it's great against Chien-Pao, which can be quite annoying otherwise, being able to Surgeon Strike through the Focus Sash and knock it out. Um, there's not much to say really about Urshifu, in terms of set variety. You can be Focus Sash with 3 attacks, like at the World Championships, that's totally fine. We've seen a bit of a trend towards Mystic Water, as mentioned earlier, mainly because it allows you to be a bit more bulky while having additional power. The bulk and the speed drop is not really a problem when you've got Tailwind and Trick Room.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And, like,
we also see, yeah,
yeah, I
we
think.
also see like
Sorry, go on.
teams dropping close combat a lot
Yeah,
as well. Because Urshifu's or Iron Hands is on the team, and you can get a load of value out of moves like U-turn and taunt. Um, I guess taunt being just a good move for stopping Trick Room, stopping a Mungus Room, ruining your day. And U-turn in the same vein as Volt Switch on Iron Hands, just giving you a lot more maneuverability with your to get your Miraidon into great positions can be very helpful. So all those moves are pretty good.
Yeah,
And you can actually, I guess, customize that slot in that Pokemon as much as you'd like, really.
yeah, for sure. And like, yeah, I think what's interesting about the Mystic Wars sets is like, yeah, you can start picking up some more interesting characters. Like you saw you picking up a
Yeah,
Chi-Yu with
definitely.
Terra Water Aqua Jet, like just
Yes.
instantly
Yeah,
removing a Chi-Yu is like massive for like a game, and like yeah, and the bulk like
absolutely.
referring to yours again, like taking that dazzling gleam, like
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I think I remember you saying on the interview that like, didn't necessarily expect that, but it was good.
No.
So
Yeah, it's just things like that. Having a bit of extra bulk can be really handy. In terms of the spread I use, it's quite easy to live moves like Modest Landris's Earth Power, um, or Zamazenta's Body Presses. And when you're living moves like that, you barely need a Focus Sash.
yeah,
And so you can have that extra power.
absolutely, yeah. It's great. So that's the six of the sort of the standard six covered. We did want to cover the sort of the two other ones you do sort of see on the build, which are uh, Dark Urshifu and Chi-Yu. So it's a couple of different dark types. Um,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on
So I
these
think
two? Obviously, you ran Dark Urshifu at Worlds, so like very
yeah. I think these are Pokemon that we've seen be much more popular in the past, but I think it still have a lot of value on Arubega Miraidon. So the Urshifu, obviously, it's still an Urshifu. It still fits great on an offensive team. Dark Urshifu, while it sacrifices some of the defensive utility that water gives you, it's much better into Calyrex Shadow matchups, provided they're not Terra Fairy. It can also kind of just hit a bit harder. It feels like you never need to invest in bulk on Dark Urshifu because it's always going to be Focus Sash and it's always going to be hitting hard. You can always be Terra Dark. Um, but yeah, you do lose some of the defensive utility that and the like flexibility in your moves that Water Urshifu can provide.
yeah.
Um, And so it's really up to preference really and where you feel you're having the most trouble in your matchups. But I would say I think there's a reason that Water Rescue has become the most popular choice.
Yeah,
Um, that doesn't mean Dark Rescue is bad necessarily.
no, like yeah, like
Um,
you've used the comp extensively and you've killed down
mm,
on water, so like yeah, speaks to
yes,
the
exactly.
value of
Me
it.
and most others.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then yeah, the other one is Chi,
And
which
then
is you say isn't as present as it had been.
yeah.
Probably more on the heavier focus on offense versions. Would you say?
Yeah, exactly. I think Chiyu was seen, as we say, right around like the Bologna special event, and it also top four the North American International Championships in 2024. Um, it is it is almost always choice scarf when used on these teams, and I guess its value comes from being a fire type that really once again draws out Miraidon's power even more. These Electro Drifts and Draco Meteors suddenly become like unmanageable. Um, what Chi also does is, while in the mirror, it's not a fairy resist, which can be quite dangerous. What it does do is it provides a Pokemon that is actually faster than everything else in Arubega mirrors, and so you can play the game in such a way that you start trading a little bit of damage on everything and cleaning up with heat waves. And actually, it can make the Arubega standard Arubega player's life quite difficult.
Yeah,
Ogerpon doesn't resist fire. A Miraidon that wants to Terra Fairy now doesn't resist fire. Einhand, whoa, good at the start. If it starts taking consistent hits, suddenly it gets chipped down really quickly. And so it can be really annoying for some Arabega Miraidon teams to face in the mirror. Um, so it definitely has some value, but I think in the general case, as we say, Ogerpon's kind of ability to be a bit bulkier. Um, its higher level of like higher damage ceiling and the supportive, side of things it
Yeah,
provides can really like give you a wider range, a better matchup spread essentially.
yeah. I'd say yeah. Like probably it's probably far less flexible than Ogerpon as your fire type. So
Absolutely.
does
Yeah.
one thing. It does quite well, but it does one thing.
Yeah. You need to be choice scarfed and you need to hit your moves.
Yeah,
As long as you're happy doing that, you might be a decent choice.
for sure. So that's sort of the team extensively covered. So it's really great for anyone looking to pick it up. So now we're just going to pick out the sort of this slide where we go through sort of overall the team. So just strengths, weaknesses, sort of a bit of a matchup spread, and then just go through like why it's still good, what might happen in the future, and just a bit of sort of use use tips from you as an experienced
Yeah.
user of the team.
Um, I guess just starting off with like its strengths, and also this kind of covers why it's still so good, is because as far as offense goes, it has everything you could possibly hope for in an offensive team. It has a wide variety of like great offensive pieces. Obviously, Miraidon, but Ogerpon and Urshifu really supporting that incredibly well, while having great bulk from Light Screen, Farigiraf, Electric Seed, and Iron Hands on the special side. Um, and also varied speed control. You have a bit of priority in Aquajet and even Fake Out. You have Tailwind and you have Trick Room, and all of the Pokemon kind of work quite well in both modes. Um, so it's a really if the team feels very fluid in its offense, and with such strong Pokemon, I don't think it can ever be bad. You'll have pieces that will have value in every single matchup, and that is when played well and properly, gives you a chance in almost every matchup. Um, that's what I think its strengths are,
Yeah,
really, is just the ability to. It's almost a perfect offense. Um, in terms of its weaknesses, well, I think some of its weaknesses are that while it really relies on Miraidon to provide or to generate a lot of the offense in a lot of matchups. And when you're able to neutralize that, suddenly you can neutralize a lot of the team and start to generate value elsewhere. So an example of this is Rillaboom and Indeedee. They are Pokemon that they're non-restricted Pokemon, but they reverse the terrain and can almost cut Miraidon's power in half. And that allows the restricted Pokemon on the team to start to match up well into your other offensive pieces. Take Calyrex Shadow, take Lunala, even. These are Pokemon that, when they don't have the immediate one-shot threat from Miraidon, can start to set up maybe a nasty plot or throw a Meteor Beam out somewhere or Expanding Force and start to overwhelm the other pieces of the team. Um, I think also if you're able to go faster or slower than a Miraidon team, you can start to just overpower them. So hard Trick Room, for example, can sometimes be a bit tricky if they're able to get their Torkoal in, or Calyrex Shadow Hyper Offenses can sometimes be a bit tricky if they're able to take a knockout and overpower you through Light Screen. Um, so all of that stuff is stuff that you can play against, but you have to be very, very careful in beating. Um, I think the biggest another exploit of the team is having fast, focused Sash Pokemon that are really hard to knock out. So things like Chiempao can be extremely tricky to deal with quickly if you're not careful,
yeah,
and suddenly they get two or three attacks and your team is melting, especially next to a Zamazenta. Rock Ogerpon. it can redirect a Draco Meteor, it can resist electric moves, it can, take Ogerpon attacks, and also threaten Ogerpon and Urshifu with one-hit KOs, while being sturdy, so quite hard to remove. Pokemon like that can be very tricky to beat, especially when paired with a restricted.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of why the Urshifu's have become Mystic Waters. Um, they're the key weaknesses of the team, I feel. I think once again, what's made Arubega Miraidon so good is that these weaknesses are still playable.
Yeah.
Um, they're not auto losses. If they were auto losses, they would the team wouldn't be used anymore. Um, because you'll notice I didn't say a single legendary Pokemon that was a tricky thing for Arubega. I said non-restricted Pokemon, and it's those non-restricted Pokemon that allow the restricted Pokemon to sometimes get out of hand.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, that's as far as the weaknesses go. In terms of like best and worst matchups, I think best matchups, I would say some of these kind of more recent Calyrex Ice balancey teams feel quite good to play against.
Yeah.
The hard Trick Room teams will always be tricky, but if they are, teams that aren't so desperate to set Trick Room or maybe a bit of a faster Calyrex Ice, you can start to overwhelm them with your offense. Especially now that they're not Terrifier. Dazzling Gleams are really annoying to deal with. Um, I think certain Terrapagos teams, where they're not using Rillaboom and Incineroar, can actually be quite good too. Um, where you can set up Light Screen, kind of neutralize their damage and just attack from there. Um, in terms of worst matchups, I think the ones that spring to mind are either Weezing Calyrex Shadow matchups, where they can deny your Tailwind, or use Calyrex Shadow to deny your Tailwind with Weezing and snowball from there, or especially now that the Urshifus are not Focus Sash, they can just be one shot easily, whereas Dark Urshifu would give you so much more room to play against it. Um, and also these Rillaboom, Incineroar, Terrapagos slash Calyrex Shadow teams can be extremely hard to beat sometimes. They have your opposing terrain, they have Intimidate for your Ogerpon, and they usually have a Follow Me user like Clefairy or Ogerpon to, you know, stop you from encoring so easily. Um, and sometimes if you let them stabilize, they can easily run away with a game. So they require very careful management. I think in terms of like the future of the team, I think we're so far in the format that I see I don't see many changes being made to the team. I feel like at this point in Reg G, you either need to put a lot of time into mastering the team if you want to get to a level where you're going to do well with it, or you need to have been using it already. Um, it is the team that's got a target on its back, like the biggest target on its back, and the reason you see people do so well with it still is because they have played hundreds, if not thousands, of games with this team and just know it inside and out. And to really get to that level, you just have to play games. I
For
also
sure.
think there are some really good resources out there, a lot of really good team reports that can help you get to that level a bit quicker.
Yeah.
So Arubega and Zine have both made team reports, which you have to pay for at very
And
little
nothing.
cost.
So
Um,
yeah, it's like
yeah,
complete.
the
Yeah.
yen is so weak.
Yeah.
Um, they're incredibly useful, and you also get their pastes and their spreads. Um, Luca has obviously made a team report on his world's winning team, which, while a little old now, still has a lot of good insight into it. Um, and so yes, I would say if you want to pick up the team, start soon and really like get to grips with it as quickly as possible. Because I think one of the strengths of the team is that actually it can be played in lots of different ways, and people with different ways of seeing the game, in a different offensive light, can come up with varied game plans, and that can really throw people's preparations off. For example, my Zamazenta matchup seemed to be completely different to a lot of others.
Yeah,
And I get it a few times where people will say, I've never had that lead against me. Um, yeah, but I kind of played enough games that I've kind of generated that plan myself and
yeah,
know how it works. So that's kind of just an experience kind of thing that I think can really give you an edge if you're using this team.
yeah. It's like what have we got?
Um,
3 more
yeah,
majors for Reg G. Like, it could definitely
maybe
win one.
two.
Two, just so definitely
It could.
Seville, Stockholm. Is there a US one? Or are we done?
Oh, maybe. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
yeah, yeah.
I
But
think there might be another US one.
yeah, but basically,
But yeah, as you say, it could definitely win.
yeah,
With the right in the right person's hands, with the right matchups on the day, as with most restricted, it is a team that is still powerful enough, um, and it's a team that can be prepped for, but it's also very easy to break people's preparation through you know strange game plans or different EV spreads, etc.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's yeah. There's you can prep against a certain version, and it can just even just a different spread can throw you off, and it's just yeah,
exactly, exactly.
um, yeah. What are your thoughts on
Um,
yeah dual restricted? That we assume that's coming next. There's no guarantee, but
yeah,
is it just drop the Farigiraf, have
yeah.
Cali Ice, carry on? Like, is it like
Supposing it is dual restricted, I I'm of the opinion that the the Ogerpon might be the one that could go.
okay?
As much as I think Ogerpon is great, I feel like with a choice specs legendary like Miraidon, if you Farigiraf feels like such an important part of the team. I think what will in its ability to block fake out, um, and also match up quite well against opposing Calyrex ice teams. I think there's probably some like adjustments that could be made to the team to give it, ways to play in dual restricted formats. I think it will probably depend quite heavily on what restricted duos are popular.
Yeah,
But as you say, sticking a Calyrex ice on probably one of the places I'm going to start.
yeah,
Sticking Pokemon like Calyrex Shadow, just good offensive Pokemon, even in the Urshifu slot, for example, could be
yeah. Like
quite valuable.
a Kyogre in the Urshifu slot could be scary. Like an offensive Kyogre or something.
Exactly. I think there's so much that can be done because at the end of the day, it is just a generic but extremely strong offense team. Adding a stronger offensive piece is probably quite good. And so I'm interested to see whether we see this Arubega style of team still continue to be popular, or if there's just other Miraidon variants that find like a lot more success when you can use two legendaries.
For sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. And then finally, just some high level tips on usage of the team.
Yeah. So one thing that I always say to people who are picking up the team is when you're using Miraidon, specifically Miraidon on this team, Draco Meteor is my most clicked attack, which might not seem intuitive at first. I know we saw Rajan at the first event just volt switching every everything for huge damage. Um, and even just being able to spam Terra Fairy Gleams feels like a good thing. But actually, Draco Meteor is unbelievably strong. It's not got many resistances, and even its resistances don't really take it very well. And it's also the strongest move you have when the terrain is shifted. Um, so I would always say, don't worry about missing. Draco Meteor is usually your strongest and best choice. Um, don't be scared to click it, and click it more often than you are.
Nice.
It is, I feel like it's best move.
I think that's a really good
Um,
bit of advice for someone
yeah,
picking out the team. Like,
yeah, I think it will completely change how much you win games when you decide when you Volt switching is great when you're doing 60, 70%, but sometimes, you know, 60, 70% is not enough. You need 100%.
yeah,
And I actually had someone when I played them at EUIC, they said, "Oh, my preparation was that you would always Volt switch." Um, and actually, I was just saying in and going for Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam,
yeah,
uh, and just throwing away my Miraidon. Um, so yes, I would always say click Draco Meteor a lot more, Volt Switch less, um, and Electro Drift the least. Um, another kind of tip I would give is that you don't have to lead with Miraidon, and in fact, actually you have some extremely strong leads like Whimsicott Ogerpon that can really. I call Whimsicott Ogerpon the hyper offense killer, um, mainly because you can set up light screen and set up tail and stuff and be so bulky and strong without having to commit your Miraidon up front. And actually, this is a really good lead against opposing teams with terrain because Ogerpon threatens both of them, like indeed and really been really hard and allows Miraidon to come in later in the game and be great. So I would say you don't always have to lead Miraidon. But that being said, if you ever want to bring Farigiraf, especially against Calyrex Ice teams, you should probably be leading Miraidon.
yeah.
Because the Electric Seed is a game changer in the Calyrex Ice matchup. And if you don't lead Miraidon, you will probably never get your Electric Seed set up. Um, so that's, I guess, another tip is you don't have to lead Miraidon, but against Calyrex Ice teams, you probably want to lead Miraidon Farigiraf.
Yeah.
Um, and the last tip I would give, I think, is against, when using Urshifu, be very wary that actually Aquajetting is a really good choice early on. Aquajetting next to Miraidon can set up some Focus Sash Pokemon for really easy knockouts and put you very far ahead where an opponent might not expect it. I caught a lot of people out over EUIC and Vancouver by just aquajetting a Pokemon and suddenly it's getting knocked out by a Miraidon attack. Um, where they might have thought they were safe to get an attack with their Ogerpon or safe to get an attack with their Chien-Pao.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm getting the Aquajet off before they can even move. Um, that's another like I guess high level tip that I'd recommend against Focus Sash or Sturdy Pokemon in particular.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. No, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, we'll move on just onto any shout outs and socials, and then we will get out of here. So, anyone you want to shout out, and then any socials you want people to
Um,
follow you on, and then we can.
well, I'm only on Oracles on Twitter, so follow if you'd like, although it's privated. I think in terms of like shout outs, I guess I'd just like to say that the reason I'm here talking about Arubega Miraidon is because I've been asked to. I wouldn't say I'm the authority on it by any means. I can name some quite incredible users of the team: Aaron Trailer, Zine, Kosikide, Luca Cherubelli, just to name some. They're all they're all people that I've built my knowledge and experience off of their great results. And I'm fortunate enough that it's a team that fits me perfectly and is one of the best teams in the format. So I guess I would say if you want to learn more about the team, check out their team reports. I got in touch with a few of them as well before EUIC to understand some of their plans, and we could kind of share plans between ourselves and to kind of make each other better. Um, and so yeah, I would say that thank you for having me. Um, I hope I've been able to impart some knowledge, but
Absolutely.
that I have only been able to use this team because other people put in the legwork to build it. And obviously, how could I forget? It's called Arubega Miraidon. Shout out to Arubega.
Of course. Changed regulatory for the better.
Exactly.
Cheers, Taran, and cheers for everyone for tuning in. You can find my socials in the description, and we will see you next time.